The shape of Nebraska's corn crop is faring slightly better than the country as a whole, according to the USDA's latest progress report. 63% of the state's corn is rated good to excellent, 2 points higher than the U.S. average. While the bulk of harvest is still a few weeks out for most growers in Nebraska, chopping silage could be around the corner. Nebraska Extension's Drewnoski joined us recently to discuss things producers should think about before cutting and storing to get the best possible results.
Well, I think the big thing to think about is getting it cut at the right time, getting it packed, making sure you got it covered, and then making sure you actually get that dry matter into the animal. So managing the feed out and not feeding all those other bacteria and yeast.
So how do you make sure that you do it at the right time?
Well, so the old rule of thumb used to be black layer, right? Well, with the new genetics that we have in corn, black layer is way too dry. And so what we need to do is we can use the indicator of milk line to kind of judge when we need to start testing. But ultimately, the best way is to actually cut whole corn plants and test the dry matter of the whole corn plants. And so we usually say at about 80 to 90% milk line is when you need to start testing. And there's multiple ways you can get it chopped up to test it. Probably one of the most simplistic is to take 5 plants and just essentially chop them up with pruning shears and use a Coster tester or a microwave to get the dry matter content.
But black layer is too late at this point?
Way too late for today's genetics.
Tell me about the storage considerations.
So storage considerations, I would say the number one thing that most people do not do correctly is they don't actually get it packed dense enough. And so we're shooting for at minimum 45 pounds per cubic foot. And so most people are actually much lower than that, and the big reason is because they have the chopper going out in the field. They may have 2 choppers going out in the field, and they have 1 pack tractor. And so we need to be essentially packing layers of no more than 6 inches at a time. If you've got 2 choppers, you need 2 pack tractors. And there's actually a formula to figure out how much weight you need on those pack tractors, but the easy way to think about it is I need 800 pounds of tractor for every ton of forage coming in per hour. Most people are way underweighted.
What do they need to know about covering the pile?
Well, covering the pile is something that a lot of people don't do. I'm sure you go around the state, you see that. And I think what they don't realize is how much nutrient content you're losing by not covering it. So if you don't cover it, surface spoilage accounts for about 20% of the dry matter. So essentially, you're throwing away 20% of that feed value. The other part of that is if you don't cover it, we also have that surface layer that's spoiled. Well, that actually negatively affects the bacteria in the rumen. So in addition to losing dry matter content, we're actually losing digestibility because we're affecting the whole diet. And so what we need to do, cover it ASAP. And what that means is not 1 week after you pack it. It really means the same day or at least the next day. Get it packed. There's barrier films that essentially don't allow oxygen to get in. It's a good idea to use those. One of the other things is you see a lot of piles where people are using bales as the sides. That's great, but make sure you're actually putting plastic on the side of those bales because they are porous, air can get through. You'll have surface spoilage on those sides as well, so go ahead and put plastic there. And then the other thing to think about is to think about how do I size that bunker or that pile, and we really need to size it according to how much feed out you're going to have. And so for 100 cows, you know, if you're feeding 15 pounds of dry matter per day, which is pretty average on the corn silage side of it, you're really only looking at maybe a 12-foot high by 10-foot wide bunker. It's a lot smaller than most people do.
And because of that reason, it's critical to manage the feed out?
Yeah, well, the feed out side of it is, it's all about making sure that that surface is not spoiling and you're not just continually feeding spoiled feed. And most people honestly aren't managing that well enough just because of the fact that they have too big of a bunker or too big of a face. We're shooting for 6 to 8 inches of that surface being fed out every day. That's the minimum amount. And so the other side of that feed out is making sure that you're not loosening up material as you go. You want to keep that face intact and you want to keep oxygen from getting into the pile. And so when we think about that, really think about how am I actually getting my forage out of that pile, one of the easiest things to do if you're going to use a front end loader, which a lot of guys do, is to go ahead and just scrape from the top down. It takes more time because you're not digging in and getting a full bucket at once, but in the end you're going to save a lot of dry matter that way. Again, about another 20% by making sure you're managing feed out properly.